The more we believe in things that are true, and understand things as they actually are, the better capable we will be to make decisions that lead to the outcomes we want. Welcome to Not So Maladroit. I've said before that the main theme of this channel is an effort to recognize that we're all flawed in the things that we believe and do, just bumbling our way through life like a bunch of bald monkeys. And because of that, I believe we can do a little bit better if we're just a bit more careful in how we think about things. This is the first in a series of videos where I really want to make good on that promise. Hello, I'm Austin Miller. I'm a PhD economist, behavioral scientist, and professor of analytics and decision making. And today, I want to talk about the greatest idea that humans have ever come up with, the invention that led to an exponential increase in human understanding, and opened the door to all of the modern marvels of engineering, medicine, and technology. And that is the scientific method.
Hail science!
In particular, in this video, I simply want to introduce and make a case for the scientific method. Exactly how to apply the method, I will explain in more detail in the other videos in this series. Now, unfortunately, most people tend to think of science as the answers to many different questions, as a collection of ideas, or things that we have discovered about things we can't see, like electrons or DNA or the inner workings of distant stars or whatever. But science is not a collection of information like a phone book. It's a method, a process. It's a way of thinking, a way of life, really. In today's crazy mixed up world, there's a somewhat surprising amount of disagreement about what is real and true. And my hope is that in talking about this, we can make some progress toward more consensus about the things that we believe and repeat and share with our friends. And I think that we can do that by better understanding, and all of us using more often, the scientific method.
Science dance!
Now, false claims and fake news are not new. They've always been a thing. But it was really weaponized in the United States in 2016. And it doesn't show any signs of stopping. By way of response, I've heard many people conclude that we just can't trust the news anymore. We might as well just believe whatever we want, and forget about it. Well, I agree that there is definitely some truth to that first part. The highest priority of any media organization is not to bring you the truth, but of course, to make money. But that doesn't mean we will all do equally well if we just decide to believe in whatever we want. Just recently, we all got a glimpse of just how bad things can get when people wholeheartedly believe in things that aren't true.
You're stronger, you're smarter. The Lord matters with us.
Meanwhile, up on the steps of the backside of the Capitol, we're seeing protesters overcome the police.
There has been tear gas in the rotunda.
The behavior that we are witnessing is shameful.
The more we believe in things that are true, and understand things as they actually are, the better we will be able to make decisions that lead to the outcomes we want. How we approach discerning what is true depends in many ways on how we think about truth itself. What is truth? Where does it come from? There are many different philosophical ideas about how to define truth, or different ways of thinking about it. I'm just going to touch on a few ideas here that seem to be the most useful right now. Specifically, I'm going to talk about the three traditional aspects of what makes an argument persuasive: ethos, pathos, and logos. If you've ever taken a persuasive writing class, I'm sure you've at least heard of these concepts. The first type of persuasive tool is ethos, which is an appeal to authority. People tend to believe things more if some authority figure said that it must be true. This coincides with a way to think about truth that is kind of the way that I was raised as a kid, and maybe many of you can relate. In the most extreme case of ethos, there is some absolute capital T truth in the universe that reveals itself to us because it's also both benevolent and good. This is the religious idea of truth. God is truth, and you can know truth by whatever God tells you. God will always tell you the truth and will never tell you anything that isn't the truth. If God said it, it's true. QED. This view of truth can be very comforting. It removes most of the brain work type of responsibility from ourselves, so we don't have to worry about it. We have someone else to tell us what is true. And then if we're wrong, well, it's not our fault. And that feels good. Variants of this type of brain work outsourcing include relying on celebrities, politicians, or experts to tell us what is true. The problem with this approach is that, well, there are so many so-called expert voices out there, and they often disagree. So which experts, or which gods even, do we listen to? Most religions disagree about a lot of things, and many people must think that at least some of those things are pretty important. But even if you have a God that you believe in and rely on for truth, it's not super likely that your God has given you the answers to every question. I've never read in any holy book, for example, anything at all about whether Truman Capote or Harper Lee really wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. And when it comes to any non-perfect, not always honest by definition, expert sources, well, people lie. Even people who claim to be or know the ultimate authority on truth might be liars. So we need some method for determining which experts to listen to. And I'll give you a philosophical hint. Trusting other experts to tell you which experts are the right experts to listen to still is probably not a winning strategy. We need something else. And that brings us to the second persuasive tool, pathos, which is an appeal to emotion. I'll make another video later about the difference between intuition and emotion. For now, I'm just going to be using them interchangeably, which, to be fair, is what I think most of us usually do. But what I'm talking about now is that we tend to believe things that just seem to be true, trusting our gut, relying on common sense, that sort of thing.
Come on, let's go check it out.
I don't know, George. I'm not so sure about this.
But I got a good feeling about this.
I got a bad feeling about this.
I've got a good feeling about this.
Come on, Joy, one more time. I got a feeling about this one.
I got a feeling.
Now, we all believe something. We all have some mental construction of the world around us and how it works. We've been building this mental image of reality ever since we were just babies, learning to recognize faces, and that the sight of a bottle meant that soon you would be eating and feeling good. And this mental picture of the world is unique to each of us, though many of the things that we take for granted are or seem to be universal. Of course, the more homogeneous our social circles are, the more overlap we will have with the people around us in terms of all of us believing the same thing. But we all have some things that we believe that are unique to our own individual experiences and education. And the more diverse people we interact with, the more differences we will find in the things that we believe. And so, similar to the expert problem, we have the question, whose intuition do we trust? We tend to know if we are being honest with ourselves, probably, but it's always possible that people who disagree with us are lying to us, right? And maybe they don't actually believe the things that they are saying. So it may be the case that we want to trust our own gut over what anyone else tries to teach us or share with us. With respect to the news these days, this is where I see a lot of people stop. They've learned that they can't trust media pundits, businessmen, or politicians to tell them the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but. They see at least two sides to every story and very little, if any, consensus. But the conclusion that I often see people make is not much more reliable, and that is essentially, well, I'll just believe whatever I want. If you're here right now, I assume that you're at least partially open to the possibility of learning from others' points of view and experiences, and I just want to say thank you. Good for you. Because it turns out that our own personal intuitions are systematically unreliable. Trusting your instincts may work for some people some of the time.
Use the Force, Luke.
But there is a vast scientific literature of evidence for what we call cognitive biases, which are systematic mistakes that we make when we rely solely on intuition. Our brains tend to jump to conclusions, ignore ambiguity, invent causes that don't exist, and be extremely overconfident in our own ideas, even when we're wrong. If you're interested in more information about these biases, and you can read, I suggest Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. If you don't have time for that, just do a Google search for cognitive biases. There's a lot out there. Or you can message me directly, and I can give you more recommendations if you'd like. But the takeaway here is that we all often believe in things that are not true. And our guts, even about things that seem intuitively obvious, are often not in line with reality. Even the wisest thinkers for 1,000 years after Aristotle, who arguably invented formal logic, believed that the Earth was the center of the universe, because it was obvious. So maybe you understand why I get a little bit nervous when I hear people say things like, well, everyone is free to have their own opinion, man. And truth be told, I hear this a lot. People get mad when their views are challenged because they feel entitled to believe whatever they want, whether it's true or not. And sure, you can believe false things if you want to, but don't expect me not to call you out, especially if you try to share that false information with other people. You do have the freedom of speech to share misinformation and lies with other people, but I also have the freedom to challenge those ideas. Again, if our goal is to believe things that are true, relying on our feelings and our instincts has certain well-documented limitations. And now, more than ever, the marketplace for ideas is saturated with conflicting opinions that cannot all be true at once. So, again, we need another tool. Which brings us to the scientific method, and the third of the three traditional tools of persuasion: logos, an appeal to logic. Intuition is quick and automatic. Our brain gives us an answer to a question as soon as or even before we ask it. But logic is slow, careful, and deliberate. It takes training and effort. It is not common sense, which is why I feel the need to make an entire series of videos about it. If you pay your brain by the minute or by effort, using logic is definitely not the way to cut costs. But dang it if it doesn't produce results. Before the scientific method, we were convinced that the Earth was the center of the universe. It was careful scientific thinking that brought us the planetary models of Galileo and Copernicus, the physics of Newton and Einstein, and all the advancements of medical science that enable us to live twice as long on average as did people 200 years ago. And most importantly, all the technological innovations of people like the Steves, Jobs, and Wozniak. So what is this magical method for isolating truth and divining reality? The basis of the scientific method is to believe something after you have observed the evidence, and only as long as the evidence persists. Seems simple, right? The problem is that typically our brains love to see the evidence for things that we already believe. This is called confirmation bias. And don't get upset, I'm not calling you out. We all do it. But this is the opposite of science. Often, confirmation bias is passive, and we don't even realize we're doing it. Other times, we actually make this mistake on purpose. Because of the discomfort that comes from challenging our current beliefs, sometimes we will make a special effort to seek out people and sources that will only tell us what we already think we know. The alternative, waiting to choose to believe something until after examining the evidence, is much more difficult, and it makes sense that it's a skill that we would naturally want to use less often. It's not very efficient for survival to go around in overdrive all the time. We have scarce mental resources that we need to conserve to make sure that we're focusing our hardest brain work on the things that matter the most. I get it. Part of this process is learning how and when to be skeptical, because we can't be careful all the time. But every once in a while, maybe it is worth it to reconsider our assumptions and reassess our beliefs. For example, think about all of the new things that you learned today. What did you see today that you believed? What came across your timeline today that you rejected as untrue? For starters, just think about it. Now, before I end today, I do want to recognize that I am telling you, as an expert, to not trust experts to tell you how to make your decisions. I get that. And I want to be clear that I'm not trying to tell you what to do or how to think. You do you. But I am hoping to share some insight, to give you some ideas that may be useful. Ultimately, I want to encourage you to think for yourself. You don't trust me? Fine, that's great. I just hope that you have a good, careful reason for it, that you use some sort of reliable method for determining what is real and true. History has shown that the scientific method is pretty good, so why not at least consider it? In the rest of this series, I'll break down the scientific method into a few simple concepts that you can apply in your life every day, not just when you put on the white coat and venture into the lab. We'll talk about the basic structure of good logic, and how to measure how convincing the evidence is for one theory or another. In the next video, I'll give you some pointers about exactly how to assess your current beliefs, with a process that I like to call Consider the Complement. See you then.